I have with me today a guy who is a current law enforcement officer, but he's so much more than that. He really gets his information out there with a couple of podcasts, with his social media, and so I reached out to him a while ago, and because I thought, people need to hear more from this guy and know what he has to say and know what he's doing to help fight that false narrative about the American law enforcement officer. Anthony Weaver, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first of all, let's talk about your police career because you've been doing this for quite a while. Tell everybody what you're doing now, what you did in the past.
So I just entered my 23rd year in the profession. I worked for 20 years for the Lancaster City Bureau of Police, and I retired from there as a sergeant. During my career there, obviously started out patrol like we all do, and then I worked on it was basically a street crimes unit, vice unit type unit, and I worked on that unit for 40 years. Then went back to patrol. Never really had a desire to be in detectives. Did like a short 3-month training stint up there, and it just didn't catch for me. So I spent, my years in patrol. Got promoted to sergeant in 2015 as a patrol sergeant, and then the last 2 years on the job, I had the pleasure of leading the selective enforcement unit, that same street crimes vice unit I had been on earlier as an officer. I was the sergeant of that unit. I had 5 officers on that unit, handpicked, and those guys were doing 700 to 900 felonies a year on that unit. So I was pushing it at the end of my career, and I loved working for that department. But I started seeing some things that I didn't like, and so I decided it was my time to go. I retired after 20 years there. Took a year off. Didn't know if I would ever get back into the profession. Wasn't sure if I had it in me. But I had an opportunity to open up at a much smaller department, and I took that opportunity. So I'm back on the job, back pushing a car right now. So
What do you think burns cops out?
I think it's mainly a cumulative effect of the job. For me personally, that's what it was. I mean, 20 years working in an urban environment, um, it wears on you. Just the constant even confrontation that many of these officers are dealing with in an urban environment. Every day is confrontation. Every day is whether it's verbal confrontation or physical confrontation or even higher levels of force with that confrontation. So I think that wears on officers, and then I think really just the narrative right now against the police and about the police really causes officers to really struggle to know exactly how they are to operate and do their job well and go home, but also not be completely annihilated and judged by the press and by people who really don't understand what they're doing.
What was it like being an urban cop in mid 2020?
It was one of, I can't even explain to you or describe to you how just shocking it was to me to see what was going on across the country. I never dreamed that I would be working for an agency or see other agencies telling their officers to stand down and to basically uh, not perform what they took an oath to perform. And I saw that, most people, they think of Lancaster, they think of Amish, but Lancaster City proper is, 7 square miles, just under 60,000
Right,
people.
in Pennsylvania, so everybody
Correct.
knows.
In
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. So it has big city problems, not to the degree of a New York City or a Chicago, but I had never observed the politicians and leaders above me basically telling us to stand down, to hide in the police station, and basically to take on this idea that we were the problem. And so, that was shocking to me, and it was shocking to me on a professional level, as someone who took an oath and took my oath seriously, but it was also shocking to me as a professing Christian because I believed that we were violating not only my oath as a police officer, but what we were called to by the word, by the Bible. So those things together for me kind of created a firestorm, along with the cumulative effect of the job on me and all the years I'd put in, where, I just felt like for myself, I couldn't in good conscience continue to operate the way my agency was asking me to operate. And I chose, and I was blessed enough to be at a place in my career where I could retire and move on.
And so you did retire. I mean, and you're a pretty young guy, and you were one of those 47% who walked away from the job in after mid 2020. And I, I want you to try to get people who are not in this profession to understand what that's like to walk away from because policing it's not a job, right? It's a literal calling. Try and explain what that was like.
I I think one of the best ways I can describe it is using the example of one of the young officers that was on my unit at the time. And he told me, I mean, this guy had maybe 5, 6 years on the job, maybe a little more. He told me he felt like his soul was being ripped out of his chest. So that I think helps put in perspective what officers were going through back in 2020 and what I think they're still going through right now, because officers have this calling and this drive to help the people who are doing the right thing and the true thing, and to go after those people who are doing the wrong thing. And so when you tell a person who believes that when they say their oath, or believes that because of their faith or just who they are as a person, and when you tell them to deny who they are as a person and no, we're not going to do that anymore. In fact, we want you to take a step back and just allow people to break the law. That really destroys someone, and destroys a sense of who they are. And so I think I don't know if that really helps explain it, but that's the best thing I can do to like try to explain what that did for me. I mean, I never in my career was I embarrassed to be a police officer. And in 2020, when I saw certain things being told to us and asked of us, I was embarrassed. And I remember calling one of my good friends, and I actually was crying to him and telling him that for the first time in my life, I was embarrassed to be a police officer, not because of what everyone was saying we were doing, but because of what we weren't doing. We were not enforcing the law. And that really had a huge effect on me personally.
It is stunning to see what law enforcement went through because of one incident in Minneapolis where you were nowhere near. And how an entire profession was blamed for the death of one man that we now know, George Floyd, probably wasn't murdered. And it changed. It didn't just change the country, right? And the profession, it changed the world.
Correct. And one thing that I was always strong on, and I look back on some of the things I thought and believed about the George Floyd incident, and I wish I would have waited a little longer. Now we're 4 years out, and we're starting to get new information that is really challenging the narrative behind that. But one thing that I was steadfast on from the very beginning in regards to the George Floyd incident was that it was absolutely unequivocally wrong for politicians, the press, to call it a racial issue. We had no idea who Officer Chauvin was, what his background was, and for people to decide the heart motives behind someone, to basically declare themselves deity, to know what someone had in their heart during the incident, I thought was wrong. From the very beginning, I said he may be a racist, but there is absolutely no proof of that, and there's still no proof of that. In fact, the narrative goes the complete other way now as more information comes out, as that documentary comes out. I just lost the name of that new documentary
Oh yeah,
that
the
came
fall
out.
of Minneapolis.
Yeah, Fall in Minneapolis. Thank you. That that really has challenged the narrative that was behind that. So, and we used, that death was used then to drive this narrative that the police were systemically racist. And again, it was based on a narrative that has never been proven, that Officer Chauvin was racist. That's never been proven. So that's one thing that really drove that narrative. And I think, unfortunately, in an election year, we may start seeing that again as we get closer and closer to the election.
So, have you been surprised by how crime has climbed in the United States?
No, absolutely not. I mean, when you start telling those people who are tasked with standing in the gap, really, and having that line between good and evil, when you start telling them, "Hey, first of all, we don't want you to do your job. In fact, we don't like you. We don't like how you do your job," and then to surround them with judges and district attorneys who don't believe in upholding the law, who don't believe in holding people accountable, um, that that you're going to reap what that sows. And so I don't know if you can see over my left shoulder here an old sign from the city, and basically there were mandatory sentences in the jurisdiction where I worked. You know, you had 2 grams of crack cocaine on you, you were doing 2 years state prison. You had a gun on you, you were doing automatic 5 years if you had it with your crack cocaine. Those mandatory minimums, they're long gone. We don't even look at that anymore. And I think in order to get back to more of a law and order feel in this country, it's going to be a hard uphill battle. It's going to be a hard uphill battle that's going to have to take into consideration getting back to some of those mandatory sentences, harsh sentences. Someone recently asked me about the whole vehicle pursuit thing. Like, how do we, balance keeping the public safe and also catching these criminals? And my opinion on that personally is you flee from the cops, automatic 5 years. You flee from the cops and you have any contraband in your car, automatic 10 years. That will start curbing the problem because guys will start thinking twice about doing that. But we don't have the guts in this country. The leaders in this country don't have the guts to do something like that. And it's unfortunate because I think it's probably going to get worse before it gets better, especially as we approach summer months here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you could have just collected your pension check and started a little garden and whatever. And but you didn't. You decided to put yourself out there with a podcast. Talk about the evolution of that.
Yeah, so as I was reaching the end of my career, I just really started feeling a strong urging. As a Christian, I felt like maybe it was a strong urging from God to maybe look into doing a podcast. And anyone who knows me would know that that just seems like such a crazy, ridiculous idea. I am not a I would have never imagined in my whole life that I would be doing a podcast, but I just felt so strongly about some of the things I was seeing that I really felt like I needed to put a voice behind some of it because I was pushing back in my agency, but I felt like I needed to push back in another platform. And so that's why I decided to create the podcast, Diakonos, A Cop's Calling. Diakonos is Greek for servant. It comes out of Romans 13. And, I created that podcast to push back against the narrative, help people better understand the profession. I think that's something that we in law enforcement can do better is help people better understand what we do, set clear expectations about what we can do and what we're about, which is law enforcement. I think we have some mission drift in the professional in that right now, but our name says what we do. We are law enforcement. That is our primary purpose and goal. And so I created that podcast. That podcast is still up. And then just recently created a second podcast with a co-host of mine, Gary Lowe, who's a detective. Between the two of us, we have over 45 years of experience, and that's called Low Expectations, Lowe Expectations, a play on his last name. And kind of the same thing. We do a lot of current events, a lot of police involved stuff, just break it down, talk about it, discuss it, bring our faith into it. We're both, followers of Jesus Christ. We bring our faith into it and talk about it in light of biblical truth at times. And really, we've known each other a long time. Gary and I have known each other a long time. So people just love our banter and the way we give each other hard time.
So what has the response been from the public?
So really, it's been unbelievable. I mean, I can't believe the amount of people that have listened to my episodes. A lot of that has to do with some of the guests I was able to bring on, Diakonos, guys like retired Sergeant John Mattingly, Eric Dim, retired lieutenant from NYPD, John McCarry. Some of these guys that you've even spoken to, were so kind to come on my humble little podcast and tell their stories, but help people understand, hey, these are some of the things law enforcement professionals are dealing with and going through. And there's a human behind there. There's someone behind that badge who's dealing with that, and who is being raked through the coals. And maybe you aren't being told the whole story and the whole truth about that situation. And so I think that's really resonated with people that listen to my podcasts and our podcasts, and has been helpful for me, therapeutic, really, honestly, therapeutic to be able to put that out there, get some stuff out there, and talk about it, and also helpful to the people that listen.
You know, when people find out the truth, for example, right
Yeah.
there about what happened to John Mattingly, what really happened in the Breonna Taylor raid, people are so shocked because that false narrative in so many of these situations gets ingrained in people's memory, and they just feel like, oh, what when you say you're telling the truth, it's not really true. I mean, this goes back to Michael Brown and the hands up don't shoot nonsense that never occurred. And how frustrating do you find that when you're uttering true statements and people say, oh, you're lying?
Yeah. I mean, it's extremely frustrating. And you talked about the Michael Brown case, and I specifically remember being a police officer in my past jurisdiction, and I remember being on traffic stops. I remember being on person stops, and I remember people walking past that weren't even involved in those incidents with their arms up and saying, "Hands up, don't shoot." And then quickly that narrative was disputed by our own Department of Justice. So, the I think one thing I always say to people is just, if you know a police officer, if you believe in what they do, just take 5 minutes to step back and wait for more facts to come out. Because oftentimes these 30-second clips we're seeing on the news that are, sensationalized, and the race grifters, and everyone jumps on them and wants to say, hey, the cop should have done this, they shouldn't have done that, and this is what happened. So many times there's so much more information and context with those situations, and giving the time to let it breathe and get some more information before you dive in and make just quick decisions about what happened.
How has social media affected the profession? Because you started when there really wasn't much in the way of social media.
Well, that's a really good question, and I have some opinions about that aren't always the most popular. I think social media is a tool, and it can be a very good tool. But I think in many ways it has affected law enforcement in a negative way. And what I mean by that is I feel like we see a lot of agencies really concentrating on trying to reach out on social media, get those likes, get those heart emojis, get those thumbs up, and and really, it's I think it's distracted from the mission of law enforcement. And I talked about this a little earlier, that I personally think there's been some mission drift in the field. And what I mean by that is I think there's a lot of agencies that are really caught up in trying to get people to like them and trying to appease people. And the problem is that in law enforcement, you will never appease anyone. Just like any profession, you will never appease anyone. But if you waste all your time trying to appease people that will never like you will lose track of what you're really called to do. And what we're really called to do is to help those people in our communities who are doing the right thing, and to be a royal pain in the neck for those people in our community who are breaking the law. I mean, really simply, that is, what we're called to do. And so I understand that social media has a role in law enforcement, but it's a tool and it's not the main attraction. And, I mean, it drives me nuts when I see these TikTok videos and the cops dancing and lip syncing. I'm like, get in your car and go do your job. That is not what I want to see on social media. And in addition to that, these agencies, I think, could just be doing a lot more, like putting out there, hey, here's this criminal rearrested. Here's these officers that did this A, B, C, and D to get this criminal off the street, and highlighting what the work of the officers are doing and highlighting the actual work of law enforcement so that people who are trying to get into the profession don't think they're getting into social work and get in there and then meet a no person and realize, oh, wait, I have to fight with someone. I have to argue with someone. I have to deal with an aggressive person. This isn't for me. I thought I was getting into social work. It's not social work. It's law enforcement. It's rough and tumble. And there are bad people out there who want to do bad things. And that's what we're supposed to be confronting. That's what we're supposed to be going up against. And so, again, social media has its place. I just think that we've kind of gotten a little off track with it in the profession.
Yeah, and that is so incredibly well said. If I never see another police lip sync video, I'll be super happy. Because you're right, we have a job to do, and mission drift is the uh, perfect way to put that. We don't have much time left. Tell people where they can find you, on your social media, where they can listen to the podcast, and how they can reach out to you.
So you can find me on X. I'm at Officer A. Weaver on X. You can also find the podcast on Facebook. It's called Low Expectations and Diakonos, a Cops Calling Podcast. It's kind of all one big Facebook page there. And then I have a website, www.diakonosacc, that's DIAKONOSACC.com. And that has everything on there about the podcast. And then really the podcasts are available wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts, you can find us there.
I tell you, we so appreciate everything you do for this profession. And I'll tell you, Anthony, I'm going to have you back because I got about 40 more questions
Awesome.
for you. But thanks so much for being with us today. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Are you passionate about supporting law enforcement? The National Police Association is on a mission to strengthen our communities, protect our families, and ensure justice prevails. But they need your help. Every dollar you donate makes a difference. It funds the legal defense of police officers and police agencies, supports advocacy for pro-law enforcement legislation, and funds community outreach programs and education. Imagine safer streets, stronger bonds between officers and neighborhoods, and a brighter future for all. Join us. Visit our website at nationalpolice.org to donate today.